At Sterling Enterprises' big yearly party, expensive champagne flowed freely, but I stuck to sparkling water and watched everything from the corner of the Grand Ballroom. My $50 phone sat on the table next to me, scratched and old, a big contrast to the shiny chandeliers and fancy clothes around me. Madison Williams, the regional manager's wife, couldn't hide her disgust when she saw my phone. "Is that really a Technophone?" she asked. I didn't even know they still made those. Her hand tightly gripped the latest iPhone, probably worth more than my entire phone. I smiled politely, used to reactions like this. "My phone makes calls and texts, and that's all I need." Madison's voice was loud and full of fake concern. "How do you even take pictures? The camera must be awful." Before I could respond, James Sterling Jr., the CEO's son, walked over with his usual smug smile. "Mom was right," he said, "letting the entire staff come to these events really brings the class down." He picked up my phone with 2 fingers, like it might dirty him. "What department are you from again?" "Mailroom," I replied calmly, taking my phone back. "I just started this week." Madison jumped in, clearly enjoying the chance to embarrass me. "Maybe after a few paychecks, you can get something that fits our company's image. But with entry-level salaries, who knows?" She sighed dramatically. "Speaking of image," James said, adjusting his expensive suit, "the board meeting tomorrow will set the company's new direction. Big changes coming." He winked at Madison. "Some people might want to start updating their resumes and their phones." I casually glanced at my cheap phone, which said 5:58 p.m. "The meeting got moved to next week," I said, taking a sip of water. James laughed loudly, drawing more attention. "Sweetheart, I think I would know about any changes to the board meeting. I'm the CEO's son." I smiled, standing up as I heard familiar footsteps. "Oh yes, James Sterling Jr.," I said, "which makes me Sarah Sterling." The room went quiet as my father, James Sterling Sr., walked in. His strong presence immediately grabbed everyone's attention. "I see you've all met my daughter," he said. Madison's champagne glass slipped and shattered on the floor. James Jr., my half-brother, who never bothered with family events, looked pale. "Since we're all here," Dad continued, his voice loud and clear, "I'd like to make an announcement. Next week at the board meeting, I'll officially be taking over as CEO. After 30 years, Dad is stepping down." James Jr.'s smirk started to return. But Dad wasn't done. "I'm proud to announce," he said, "that after completing her MBA at Harvard and spending the past 5 years turning around our international divisions under a different name, my daughter Sarah will be taking over as CEO effective immediately." The room went dead silent. I could almost hear Madison's jaw drop. But I'm your son," James Jr. stammered. "I've been working here for 3 years. Dad cut him off smoothly. "During which time you spent more money on designer suits than you brought in from deals." Meanwhile, Sarah increased our international profits by 324% while living on an entry-level salary and using a basic phone because she wanted to understand every level of our business. I pulled up the company performance charts on my trusty $50 phone and projected them onto the ballroom's presentation screen. Actually, I added, "It's a 324% profit increase. Would anyone like to see the quarterly breakdowns?" The next hour was a blur of executives who'd ignored me all night suddenly acting like they wanted to discuss international market strategies. Madison's attempts to apologize were almost as funny as watching James Jr. try to explain to his friends why he never mentioned having a sister. But the real work was just starting. I had spent 5 years learning every part of the business, starting from the mailroom. I saw how people like Madison's husband treated staff when they thought no one important was watching. I also saw the toxic culture James Jr. and his friends created in upper management. Now as CEO, I had the power to change all of that. My $50 phone buzzed with a text from Dad, "Ready for phase 2. I smiled, thinking of the restructuring plans already prepared on my laptop. James Jr. had been right about one thing. Big changes were coming to Sterling Enterprises, just not the ones he had expected. The party wrapped up around midnight, but I stayed behind, sitting in what would soon be my office, looking out over the city lights, the same view James Jr. probably thought would be his. My cheap phone sat on the expensive desk, a reminder of where I had started and why. The door opened quietly, and Dad sat down across from me. "Your mother would be proud," he said, She always said success wasn't about having the most expensive things, but about understanding the value of everything. I thought about my late mother, who taught me that true worth wasn't in designer labels or the latest gadgets. The board meeting next week will be interesting, Dad finished, smiling. Especially when they see the evidence. I had gathered a lot of evidence about certain executives' creative accounting practices. My phone buzzed again, this time with an email from HR confirming receipt of my restructuring plans. Phase 2 would start tomorrow, bright and early. Madison's husband had been skimming from employee pension funds. James Jr. had been inflating his expense accounts and taking kickbacks from suppliers. I had all the documentation, gathered carefully over 5 years while they were too busy judging my phone to notice what I was really doing with it. Get some rest, Dad said, heading for the door. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. I picked up my $50 phone, checked the secure folder containing 5 years' worth of evidence. Yes, I agreed. It certainly is, for some executives at Sterling Enterprises. Tomorrow will be their longest day ever, and I'd record it all on my cheap phone. The next morning, I arrived at Sterling Enterprises at exactly 7 a.m., my $50 phone and evidence securely in hand. The security guard did a double take when I used the executive elevator. Apparently, James Jr. had sent a company-wide email at 3:00 a.m. claiming I was an imposter. Miss Sterling, my new executive assistant Thomas greeted me. He'd been with the company for 20 years and had seen everything. Mr. James Jr. is waiting in your office with his lawyer. Perfect, I smiled, pulling up a specific folder on my phone. Please call security and have them ready. James Jr. was sprawled in my chair, feet on my desk, his lawyer standing nervously beside him. Listen, sis, he sneered at the word. Let's make this easy. You walk away now, keep whatever Dad promised you, and we'll forget about your little stunt last night. I set my phone on the desk, camera facing him. You mean like how you forgot about the Miller contract? I asked. His feet dropped from the desk. What Miller contract? 3 months ago, you took a kickback of $500,000 to award it to your friend's company instead of the more qualified bidder. I played the recording from my phone, James Jr.'s own voice discussing the deal in what he thought was a private conversation. You can't, his lawyer started. Oh, but I can, I said calmly. You see, while everyone was busy mocking my cheap phone, they never noticed it recording their conversations. Legal in this state with one-party consent, by the way. I turned to the lawyer. You might want to stay for this next part. It concerns your billing practices too. Security arrived as James Jr. lunged for my phone. This is all lies. I'll sue. Actually, I pressed play again. Here's you admitting to embezzlement last Christmas. And here's your conversation with Madison's husband about the pension fund scheme. The FBI is very interested in that one. The lawyer quietly gathered his things and left. By 9:00 a.m., Madison's husband had been escorted from the building, his computer seized by corporate security. By 10:00 a.m., 3 more executives had resigned after facing audit findings. James Jr. was still yelling about lawsuits when security removed him from the premises. Your brother's friends are all resigning, Thomas reported, bringing in more documentation. And Madison is in the lobby, insisting she needs to speak with you. I checked my phone's calendar. The board meets in an hour. Let her wait. The board meeting was everything I had prepared for. 5 years of meticulously gathered evidence, every questionable deal, every misused fund, every instance of harassment or discrimination I had witnessed while working entry-level jobs throughout the company. Miss Sterling, one board member sputtered, "This is unprecedented?" I interrupted. No, what's unprecedented is how long this corruption was allowed to continue. This company was built on innovation and integrity. Today, we return to those values. My phone buzzed. A message from Dad. Your mother would be proud. By evening, Sterling Enterprises had a new organizational structure. Qualified employees who'd been overlooked due to office politics were being promoted. The pension funds were being audited and restored. And my brother's old office was being converted into an employee daycare center. Madison finally caught me as I was leaving. Her designer outfit was wrinkled, her perfect makeup smeared. Sarah, please, you have to understand. We never knew. That's exactly the problem, I interrupted. You never bothered to know anything about people you thought were beneath you. How's that working out? My husband, the pension funds. Please, we can work something out. I held up my cheap phone. Everything's already worked out. It's all documented right here on my embarrassing little phone. The authorities have copies. I stepped into my car, then paused. Oh, and Madison, I'm keeping the phone. It reminds me never to judge someone by appearances. The next few months transformed Sterling Enterprises. Employee satisfaction skyrocketed. Productivity increased. Even our stock price jumped when the market realized how much dead weight we cut. James Jr. tried to contest Dad's decision, but it's hard to claim rightful inheritance when you're under federal investigation for fraud. Last I heard, he was looking for work, but his reputation preceded him. Madison's husband took a plea deal. She sold her designer handbags to pay for his legal fees and moved in with her sister in Ohio. 1 year later, I sat in my office, looking at the same view. I contemplated the night of the party. My $50 phone sat in a frame on my desk, retired but preserved as a reminder. Beside it stood a photo of my mother smiling proudly. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Miss Sterling, the new employee orientation is starting. I smiled, picking up my new phone, still not the most expensive model, but chosen for its functionality rather than status. Thank you, Thomas. Let's go welcome them. The orientation room was full of eager faces. I took my place at the podium, my simple phone recording for training purposes, just like its predecessor had done. Welcome to Sterling Enterprises, I began. Let me tell you a story about a $50 phone and what it taught me about true value. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't just about getting even. Sometimes it's about making sure no one else has to experience what you did. Sometimes it's about changing an entire culture, one recorded conversation at a time. And sometimes it's about keeping your cheap phone as a reminder that appearances can be deceiving. The most powerful weapon isn't the most expensive one. It's the one people underestimate.